You, Quentin.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. Like Quentin mentioned, I'm Mary Ann Jennings, and I'm the Assistant Director with Family Resource and Youth Services Centers. But the one thing I also do is I'm a member of the Public Policy Committee for the Coalition. And so I have been going to the Capitol, working with the Public Policy Committee, and just really advocating for our centers and for Frisk for probably about over 25 years. So this is really close to my heart. It's something I'm very passionate about and excited to talk about it today. And I'm going to let Leslie and Mike introduce themselves. And
Hi, I am Leslie Hall. I work at North Hardin Youth Service Center in Hardin County, Kentucky, and I've run the gauntlet on the coalition. So I've gone from vice president, all the way through public policy chair. I'm currently serving as your public policy chair on the coalition, and like Marianne, not as many years, but for more than I can remember, because it's been more than 2 minutes. I have been with the coalition and learning and growing and advocating in Frankfort for Frisk.
And then I'm the last one. I'm Mike Flynn, and I am a youth services coordinator at the Estill County Middle School. And like Leslie, I've run the gauntlet on the coalition and held every office they have, except for the one that gets the exit from the coalition. But I will say that I've been with public policy in the coalition for 20 plus years, and it's one of my favorite things about being a Frisk coordinator.
so let's find out where you're from. So I've got a poll here. So just go ahead and click in there and tell us which region you're coming from today. Looking like lots of Region 1 folks. 7. Wow, I think we have representation from almost everywhere. It looks like 9, maybe 3A. So great. We have a nice little variation there from across the state. So we're really glad to see everybody here today. Thanks for responding. Looks like we have a few people that weren't able to, but so that's great. So we've got a lot of folks from all across the state. So we appreciate that. All right. So also, the next thing I want to know is we want to kind of gauge as we get started and ask you a couple of questions. So we'll know what we're starting with and where we end. So let's look at this question. I want to ask you, um, do you know who your legislators are? So it's just yes or no. So this would be your state legislators. Do you know who your state legislators are? So I know that mine is I have a Senator Williams and then Representative Derek Graham are my 2 state legislators for where I live. So we'll give you just a couple of seconds to answer that. Just a simple yes or no. Do you know who your legislators are? It's okay if you don't. By the end of this hour, we hope to help you figure out where to find that information and so that you will know. But just wondered thus far. So it looks like most people do. We have a few folks that do not, but most people do know who their legislators are. Okay, just got one more question. One more question I want to ask. And that is not letting me launch. Hang on. The very last question is, how confident are you in your knowledge about the legislative process? So are you very confident? I think I know a little bit, or you're not confident at all. And again, any answer is okay. We just kind of want to gauge where we are today. So are you very confident? I think I know a little bit, or not confident at all. So looks like we've got most of our folks are running right down that middle, right? I think I know a little bit. Good. Hopefully by the end of this, we can move you up to you're feeling confident about it. That's where we want to go. That's where we want folks to be. So that's what we're going to try to do today. Thanks, guys, for doing that for me. It won't let me close my polls. Just a second. All right. As we talked earlier before you guys got on, that we are all friends here and things happen. And so right now, my PowerPoint does not want to advance. So give me just a, there we go. All right, we're working now. So what do we want to accomplish today? So our objectives today is we want you to learn and understand the basic legislative terms. We're going to actually talk about how a bill becomes a law because that's pretty important as we move through the legislative process, and especially our budget bill we're going to talk about today. And we also want to hear about Frisk Coalition public policy, their advocacy efforts, and then topics of interest. So those are our objectives, and hopefully by the end of the webinar, we will have accomplished those. So that's what we're working towards. I want to start, as I get started, I want to say that this is just a kind of an upper level view of the things we're going to talk about. I know that me personally, and I feel that Mike and Leslie will say the same, that we are not we are not civics majors in school. We are not, there are many things that we do not know, but there have been things that we have learned over the years. So there may be questions that we can't answer, but this is from our perspective, the things that we've learned and things that we feel like would be of interest to you as we move through the legislative session. So I am not ashamed or afraid at all to say that I have no idea the answer to that question, but we'll work through it together or we'll try to find some answers. So we want to start off just by talking a little bit about committees of interest. And why do we start there? And that's because a lot of work happens in committees. When the legislature begins their work, and I'll talk about those later, but when they begin their work, they begin in committees. And so we monitor those committees, and that's really important to monitor so that we can see what's coming up, what are things of interest to Frisk, and what things the legislature is working on. So when we think of those, we look at the Senate, and there are 3 things that are listed and then a couple of subcommittees. And so public policy monitors these committees. So the first one in the Senate is appropriations and revenue. So the reason that's important is that that's where the budget bill, that is where the budget bill travels through, is that we call it the A&R committee. And because the budget is so big and such a daunting task, they break that down into budget review subcommittees. So there are even a couple of those committees that we look at. Some of the terms you may or may not know. So if there are things that I say that you're like, what in the world is that? Feel free to put it in the chat and I'll be happy to explain a little more. I'll just go ahead and say that appropriations is they're assigning funding, and revenue is looking at the money that's coming into our state. So when they say appropriations and revenue, then that's what they're working on, the money, where money's going, and then the money that's coming into the state. So we're looking at the Budget Review Subcommittee on Health and Family, the Budget Review Subcommittee on Education, and then we're also looking or monitoring to see what kinds of bills and topics are coming through the Senate Education Committee and the Senate Health, Families, and Children Committee. So those are the ones in the Senate. And then you'll see this looks very similar in the House. They have an Appropriations and Revenue Committee. There's a Budget Review Subcommittee on Health and Family Services. And then this one has a little different title, but it's a Budget Review Subcommittee on Primary and Secondary and Workforce Development. And then there's the Education and the Family and Children's Committee. So those are the ones in both the House and the Senate that your Public Policy Committee is monitoring very closely as we go through the session. Let's talk about the session. So coming up in 20 is an even year. So this legislative session starts January 2nd, and it is an even year. So that means people refer to it as a long session. So you'll hear that quite a bit. That means that they are going to do 60 days of business between January and April. So that's considered a long session. A short session is 30 days. And so it's very similar in the timeline, but they're only going to be working 30 days, and therefore it's called a short session. So the long session or the even yeared sessions are always where they're going to do work on the budget. They're always going to address the budget. They're going to create a 2-year biennial budget, and that's going to be created in those even years. Then those odd years are really supposed to be for additional work topics, areas that they want to work on because the budget work's done, right? So that should give them 30 days to work on other things. That's typical. We can say, like during the pandemic, there was an odd year that they did look at the budget, but in general, even years are going to be when the long sessions are going to be when they're looking at the budget. If you look down in the corner, you'll see a number. So like on January the 2nd, there's a number 1 down there in the right-hand corner. That means that's the first day they're going to do business. So if you want to pull up this calendar, and we'll show you where to find it here in a little bit or talk about it. If you pull up this calendar, you'll see that there are 3 months that there are 4 months that they are going to be showing on their legislative calendar. But you'll see 60 numbers in the right-hand corner, and those are their work days. So if you want to know if they're working on a certain day, if they are working in Frankfort, then that's how you'll tell. You'll pull up the calendar and you'll see those work days there in the corner. So typically on a regular day, on a Monday, they're gonna go into session in the afternoon, probably around 4 o'clock. And that's on a Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is a pretty usual calendar. They meet in their committees during the morning, and then they're going to go into session somewhere around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then on Friday, they're going to start earlier in the day, and they're typically going to start at 10 a.m. and then they're going to adjourn when their business is done so that they can go home for the weekend. So that's kind of what a legislative day and calendar would look like for the short and long sessions. So just some session facts to
Marianne?
remember. Yes.
Can I just jump in with the
Sure.
calendar too? And I know that when we'll talk about this a little bit more, but we have like on the long session, that's usually when we do the meet and greet in Frankfort. And then on the shorter session is when we ask folks to do the local legislative receptions. But if you look on that one calendar, the short session calendar, you see all the gray there in January. Those are days that the legislators are not necessarily in Frankfort, but are probably back at their home base. So when you wonder why we choose the dates that we choose in order to do these things, that is why, because we understand that during that time, the legislators should be in their home offices and be easier for the coordinators to get in touch with them. I just wanted to kind of explain that we don't just randomly go, oh yeah, let's do this day or this week or whatever, but there's a process behind when we choose and ask different regions to do what they do at home.
Yeah. So in the longer session, we have more of an opportunity to meet with legislators there, in Frankfort. And then the short session, it becomes a little more complicated just because there's not as much time when they are typically in Frankfort. Some other things to remember about the session, the first 4 days of the session, that's when they elect their leadership and set their rules. So they're not doing a lot of bills or a lot of other business, but they're using that time to set those. And then you may hear the term sine die. And so I always thought that was very interesting, but that's the last day of the session. So when it's when the session has gone sine die, that it has ended. So it's a Latin term, and that's the end of the session. Senate and House bills with a low number are seen as priority. So as a bill is introduced, it's assigned a number. And so if the House and Senate assigns a bill a low number, then that means it's a priority for them. And then also we want to remember that the governor's budget address is usually the third Wednesday in January. And we're going to discuss a little later what's the difference between the governor's budget and then the legislative budget too. So, but his address is usually that third Wednesday in January. So I mentioned committees. This is another thing that you can find on this website I'm going to show you here in just a minute. So they have standing committees so that we know, or you know, or everybody knows that when the Families and Children Committee is going to meet in the Senate and when it's going to meet in the House every year. So they set those times ahead of time. So you know that that last year we knew that every Tuesday at 8 a.m. the House Education Committee was going to meet in room 154. So all those are usually set. There's an agenda, and those meetings usually happen. It would be rare. They will cancel occasionally, but not very often. So there's a list of these so you can find out when those committees are meeting. And most of the time, or a lot of the time, they're televised through KET if you want to watch them and keep up as well. So here's that website I've referenced a couple of times. So it's legislature.ky.gov, and that is where we find tons of information, lots of information. We're going to That's where you're going to find schedules, calendars, bills, who your legislators are, and even education materials is at this website. So I encourage you to put that in your favorites and use it often. So it's really a great resource, and I use it a lot, I know myself. So first of all, let's talk about how a bill becomes a law, and then we'll even show you then where to find those bills. But how does a bill become a law? And the one we're probably, or as we walk through, we'll kind of focus on, or you hear me reference, would be that budget bill, because that's just kind of foremost in our thought and one that we deal with a lot. So as we go through these steps, that's what I'm going to reference. So I'll just be talking about how their budget bill is going to move through this legislative process. So here is a great document. I think it's like in the resources for students, but I love it. I use it all the time because some of these terms and things, I forget what they are, and it is really a good resource, and you may want to have it handy just as we go through these steps, because it does have a lot of good information. It's got that glossary on the right-hand side, and then it kind of simplifies and walks you through the steps. Now, obviously, there can be some, they've used a simplified process, and some of these steps can be way more complicated than what they have listed there, but it'll kind of give you a brief overview. So I think Mike Flynn's going to put that in the chat for you.
It's already in there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
All right. So first step is, when the time comes, there's going to be a bill that's introduced. So bills can be introduced by the House or by the Senate. So any legislator can introduce a bill. Multiple legislators can sign on and introduce a bill. It doesn't just have to be one. Several legislators can draft them. A legislator can draft a bill, and then other legislators like it, so they can sign on at that point. So there are multiple ways there are multiple legislators that can have a bill, and you will see hundreds of bills introduced within the legislative session. It's a crazy amount of bills. Not all of them go anywhere, and we'll talk about that too, but there's just a crazy number. The bill numbers are assigned once they're introduced. So for example, the budget bill, we never know what the budget bill number is going to be until it's assigned. You'd think it'd be in that top few because it's important. But while it is a priority, it is never one of those top 10 bills numbers that are up there. It always has just a unique number when it is introduced. So bills that are introduced from one session to the next get a whole new number. So if you follow House Bill 35 last year, and you know they're going to it didn't get passed, it didn't go anywhere, and they're going to reintroduce it, it's going to have a new number because they reassign those every year. We also know that the revenue and tax bills always have to begin in the House. So the revenue and tax bills start out there. You're never going to see a revenue or a tax bill that's going to begin in the Senate. So that's just the business that they do. I really don't know if that's constitutional or how that works, but that's just how it works. So once that's introduced, the bills are introduced, then they go to what's called a committee on committees. And isn't that crazy? I don't know. I've always thought that's funny, committee on committees. But it is a group of legislators, and they're going to decide what bill, once a bill's written and it's given a number, what committee is going to take a look at that. So for example, there may be a bill about student mental health. So if they get a bill about student mental health, they can choose, are we going to, since it's student mental health, should that go to education or should that go to Health and Family Services? So, or Health Services Committee. And so that's the kind of decisions that they make. So once the bills come, then the committee on the committees, they decide what committee that they're going to go to. So it's, and then once they do, make that decision, then the bill has to be acted upon in a committee, or what happens a lot is that there's no action at all. So it'll be assigned to a committee, and then the chair of that committee then decides if the bill will be talked about, whether it'll move further. Now, not the budget bill always is discussed and moved further, but I'm talking about other bills that are written. The chair of the committee then would have the say-so if the bill actually gets called up or if it just sits there with no action taken. So there's a lot that can happen in these committee meetings. There can be discussion. So a bill doesn't always have to be voted on. So once the bill is in that committee, if the chair decides to call it up, they can call it up for discussion. They can call it up for vote. They can ask people with expertise to come in and speak on that bill. You can have legislators who have drafted the bill that ask to speak. There's just a lot of work that goes on within that committee once that bill has been assigned and once it's pulled up. So this is just singled as one step, but there's a lot in this one step about bill action when it's in the committee. So I just wanted to point that out, that there's a lot that goes on with it. So then once it's in the committee, if it is discussed and it's voted on and it passes favorably out of the committee, then it's going to go actually to the full House or the full Senate. And it may say to the floor. The floor is just a term folks use for just saying the whole group of either House or the whole group of Senate. And so a lot of people refer to it as that bill is going to the floor, and that's what that means. So it's a first reading. So the bill is given its first reading and placed on the calendar. Placing it on the calendar just means it's on the list of bills that are looked at by that body that day. So it gets a first reading, then it gets a second reading. Look at this little girl. That's where we are some days, right? At the when we're moving through this process. So the bill is given its second reading, and then it's sent to the Rules Committee. So 2 readings, and here we are, the Rules Committee. We're just the reason these pictures are on here is this can be a really long process, right? And so just when you think it's all over, then you finally made it to the Rules Committee and places on the orders of the day. And that's where it's going to get its third reading and discussion. And once it gets its third reading and discussion, it can be voted on, or they can send the bill back to committee for more study. So it's not always a done deal once it comes up to the House or Senate floor that's going to be voted on. It could go right back to committee. If they don't feel like they have the votes to pass it and it needs more work, instead of putting it up for passage or to have it decline, they'll go ahead and send it back to committee for more discussion and more work. So that can take a lot of time. But then if it is on the floor and it's voted on, it is passed, and then it'll go to the next chamber. And guess what? All this happens all over again. Can you believe that? So we just went through one piece. All of this has to happen twice. So if a bill originates in the House, like the budget bill I talked about, then once it passes in the House, it's going to go over to the Senate, and they have to do that whole process all over again. It's going to go to a committee, then it's going to be voted on. It's going to have the 3 readings, and then once it goes through those, after it's done that, they still can't agree. So the House passed a version, and it looked good. The Senate, no, they didn't like it. They wrote their own version, and they didn't agree with what the House said. So what happens when that happens? Well, if they pass different versions of the same bill, then they're going to have to come together in what's called a conference committee. So that means that representatives from the House, representatives from the Senate, and when I say representatives, that means people from both parties in the House, both parties in the Senate, are going to come together and they're going to talk out their differences. And then they're going to take a final bill back to each chamber, what they've worked out, and they're going to pass that bill. Okay? So once we do that, once that bill passes through both chambers, it's going to go to the governor. But he has some choices to make too, right? So once the governor has it, he's going to make his choices. What can he choose to do? He can sign that bill and it can go into law. That's the easy thing. If it's something that he agrees with, it can become a law without his signature after a certain number of days. If he hasn't signed it, he hasn't done anything about it, then it just becomes a law without him signing on it. Or the third thing is he can veto it. When we say veto, that means he doesn't agree, he doesn't like it, and he can just send it. He can say that, no, I do not like it, and it goes back to the House and the Senate. He vetoes it, and only in the budget bill can he veto line items. So, for example, he may say that he wants Frisk to get an additional $50 million, but he does not want another thing in the budget to get additional money. So he can strike that line and he can veto just that piece and send it back to the legislature, but only in the budget bill can he do line item vetoes. So then if it's vetoed, then we look at step number 11, and it goes back to each chamber. And if they have enough votes, then they can override his veto and it becomes law anyway. So they do have to have a certain number of votes for that to happen. So, my friends, that is the how a bill becomes a law in a nutshell. And it seems so simple when we look at it in these 11 steps, but can I just say that it is way more complicated or it seems to take so much time. I shouldn't say complicated. It seems to take so much time when we're watching it walk through all these steps during the legislative session. But it truly only has about 11 pieces to it. Leslie?
But what I want to encourage too is if you're sending, if you're especially if you're sending a page on page days, come sit in one of the chambers at some time and listen to the language that we've just heard. Even as often as I've sat in there as a part of the coalition, this was just such a nice explanation of the back and forth and the points. But there, when I first sat in the chambers, I thought, okay, I don't. They're saying first reading, but they're not reading anything. They're not reading it all. It doesn't mean that they're going to sit and read the entire bill. It just means they're presenting it basically for the first time. To that,
That's a
and I
good
always,
point, Leslie. Thank you. Yeah.
well, I just always sat there wondering, okay, they said first reading, but I don't hear nobody's, and they're moving on. Okay, so I'm missing something, but you're not. It just means that they're going to that they're presenting it at that point in time for the first time, and then the second, third, and back and forth. But it's very interesting if you ever have the time to be in Frankfurt and hear this language. And to watch the process, it's just kind of amazing. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie, because there are so many nuances that that happen that you don't really think about, like she's talking about. Like when they do say first reading, they're not actually reading the bill; they're just telling you what the bill is, and then it's then the legislator, if they choose, or we hope that they would, they're going to take a look at that bill, and then they're actually going to see what the content is of that bill at that point. So, thanks, Leslie, for pointing that out. That's great. So I mentioned we would show you where you're going to find these things. So this actually is just a screenshot of where you find bills. So if there's a bill that's important to Frisk, and it's not always just the budget bill, we were included in a bill a couple of years ago that had to do with donations. And so that was something that we watched. It was donations that were coming into Family Resource and Youth Services Centers. And so we wanted to keep track of that. We wanted to see where it was going. We wanted to actually read the language. So we found out what the number was of that bill. And then if you look here, this page to me is so daunting when you see all these things that are on there, like bills with 2 readings laid on the clerk's desk, those kinds of things. But if you know the bill number, you go to this page, which is a 2023 regular session record, and there'll be one of these for 2024. I put in red just Senate bills and House bills. And so that's where you just go to and you click on that link, and it's going to give you all of the numbers. And so then you just choose the bill number that you want to monitor, you want to look at. And so I encourage you to do that. And like I said, don't let this page be so daunting to you, because it really is just as simple as going to bills and amendments, and you can find the Senate bill and the House bills. So are there any questions on the, I know that wasn't exactly exciting stuff, but I feel like it's pretty important about the content, about how things work, how, just some good information as we start the legislative session. All right. I am going to turn it over to Mike or Leslie then to talk about bills. Am I not?
Is this me or is this you?
This is you, Leslie.
Okay, all right, I will take it. The Coalition Public Policy Committee really just kind of gets into the nitty gritty and the meat of things for the coalition, for all the coordinators statewide. We do encourage you to get on there and keep abreast of things on your own as well. I use what's called Bill Watch, and you can. It's a really neat program. So sorry. Fourth period starting. Um, bill watch is something so you can put in particular words or particular bill numbers, and it kind of keeps an eye on you and sends you little emails when they come up for when things are being discussed about it. So that's kind of cool. But we do keep definitely an eye on what the governor puts in his budget, and then that goes to the House and the Senate. They have their budgets that they can correct in that way. Any bill that could impact Frisk. That's one of the things I like about Bill Watch is you could just type in the word education, and any bill or anything like that that has education, it'll keep an eye on it for you and send you an email when it's discussed. But we definitely keep an eye on anything that could impact Frisk. I know that we discussed a little bit ago, the reorganization committee that they were looking at and reorganizing thing. And I think we did very well on our call to action for that. But we keep an eye on those things. That's how they come up. That's how we know about them before they're made into law or before it goes to either one of the floors. Timing and a clear picture of the issue, that is something that we have to stay abreast of. And because it's easier for a smaller group to kind of lead the charge, but when we do, well, we will need you guys. That's when we will send out the call to actions. I know that's coming up here in a little bit that we talk about. Does anybody have any questions, or do you guys have anything to add, Marianne or Mike, about the budget bill, governors? I mean, that's the long session. We always just call it's a budget session.
I'll just chime in a little bit, Leslie, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Excuse me. So one thing that's important for everybody to realize is, I didn't know this until I started working with public policy, is there could potentially be multiple versions of a budget that come out. It's because the governor has his budget, which traditionally, over the past, the governor's budget traditionally comes out first, and then the House and Senate budget comes out. But now we've had years like this last budget time when the House and Senate released their budget bill before the governor had a chance to release his. So the important thing to remember is the House and Senate do not have to work off of the governor's budget once it's presented. They can go out on their own and create their own budget without working off of his budget. So that's kind of one of those things that a lot of people don't understand, but it can happen. And then another thing that's important for everybody to know is, there are 3 different entities who are watching bills and legislation that is going through Frankfort every year. You have your public policy committee that's doing it. Then the division as well is offering opportunity, is monitoring things that they may watch. They are watching things to see if there's something that's going to impact the coalition, not the Frisk. And then on top of that, the coalition has a lobbyist registered in Frankfort. His name is Michael Jones. He's also our operations manager for the coalition. But Michael Jones is also doing what Leslie was talking about, putting those searches in and keywords to make sure that Frisk or showing up any bills that he's letting public policy and the coalition know that those are bills that we may need to watch. So we have 3 different entities all the time that are watching the legislative process. So we've got lots of eyes and ears on it, is why I guess what I want everybody to know. And then the other thing is that Leslie touched on this about the timing of issues, but a lot of times you may hear about a bill that's got Frisk mentioned in it, and you may be thinking, well, no one has said anything about this bill. And if no one said anything about it, that means that the coalition is monitoring where that bill is in the process. They're talking to public policies, talking to legislators who may be sponsoring that bill to get a better understanding of what the intent of the bill is. And sometimes there's meetings where we have conversations with folks, legislators, and say, do you know what the unintended consequences of this piece of legislation could create for Frisk? And so a lot of times, issues are diverted and worked around without having to do a call to action. So if you see something that look a little concerning, or someone says something's a little concerning, always reach out to someone, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But always also know that sometimes the coalition of public policy are just waiting for the right moment to make sure that there's a clear picture of what's going on before we try not to have knee-jerk reactions, because it's a whole lot easier to clean up a reaction that's well thought out and planned that may go south. But if you have a knee-jerk reaction and it goes south, then you lose a lot of credibility, not only with our coalition memberships, but also with legislators.
Yes, and we have spent a lot of time over the last 30 plus years building the relationships with our legislators. We are one of the entities, our coalition is one of the entities that is that has our great bipartisan relationship with our legislators from both sides of the aisle. And we work a lot to maintain that for the coalition across the state. Now, what Mike had to say was, if you're looking through some stuff and you see something that's, you're like, I need to know more about that, or why is that there, and I haven't heard about it from my coalition, please reach out to somebody on the public policy committee, or reach out to your regional. Look, I almost said regional program manager, and that's your regional representative from the coalition, and we can get those answers for you, because like Mike said, it might just be something that we're choosing. We feel like we need to monitor versus have a reaction to quite yet, and that's all been learned over time. We've had our knee-jerk reactions. We've had this, that, and the other, and we've learned a lot over the years for that. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to add for this slide? If not, we can go to the next one. The coalition has several advocacy efforts, and Page Days is one of them, and it's quite a big one. It's a very big undertaking, and if anybody sees Krista Camposano just sometime in February, just hug her. She's gonna need a hug, because this year I think we have like a 170 something kids going, which is more students than we've ever had on there. So if you also hear that somebody said, well, I meant to turn this in, but it's a little late, and they were told no, that is why, because we're having a limited number of available rooms to use this year for Page Days, and a lot more kiddos. But just to make sure that everybody understands, one kid per school. Please mark that on anything you have that has Page Days on it. Please only send us one application from your school, because it can't be any more than that, and we're not there to make the decision on who goes or who doesn't. It will be the first application that we receive from your school. But choosing a student doesn't have to be complicated. How I do it is I have different clubs that the Youth Service Center sponsors. So like my Green Dot committee, student committee, I could take the president of that, or I take the president of the 4 Club, or something. You can literally choose a student. Doesn't have to be a contest. I know one elementary school tried to do a contest, not this year, several years ago. Tried to do a contest through all the civics classes and an essay contest, and it got to be very complicated and wore her out. And I'm just like, Johnny is your teacher's student. He's in 5th grade. Just take him. It could be that simple. Now you can choose however you want to. If you want to make it a really big deal, please feel free. But usually the timeline is we're looking at pages coming in and doing the applications in November and December, which is a very busy time for all of us. So just choosing somebody, to me, just that's why I just did that. It made sense to get that done and get it over with. But so just choose a student as best you can. But the timeline is, yeah.
In the chat, Laura asked, will all students submitted be selected to attend? As long as it's one per school.
Right.
Right.
If you've only sent one in, because I have the list of all the students, and we've got about 7 schools that sent multiple. So I think Chris is going to be reaching out to them to see if they have a preference, or it will end up being the first student from the timeline. But yes, if you have submitted it, they will be chosen. But who they will page with and what day they will page on, that will not come until closer to the end of January. Okay. So I hope that helps a little bit. But the timeline is you have your applications that are November and December. And I always try to explain to my kiddos, this is a long process. And you'll hear this when you come for Page Days, because that's the first thing we say to the pages and the parents. I understand that you filled that it is March 3rd and you filled this out in November. And then we try to explain that process to them. It would be very helpful while coordinators are getting permissions for the applications. If they could, that might be something we put in, kind of like in the instructions. Please explain to the parents and the students that this is a long process. But But then notifications at the end of January, page days on short sessions. We usually try to do February, March, but long sessions, it could roll into April, maybe a little bit, depending on when we can get rooms scheduled at the Capitol. In a lot of people and students and parents especially kind of forget about, oh, I put that application in, but we're really going to work this year so that everybody who put in an application and who is selected will get their notification by the end of January. Okay. Parents need to have time to take off work. Coordinators need time to arrange for that to be a field trip day, and all kind of things like that. I'm kind of looking in the chat.
I think I answered. She was asking if you serve 2 schools, can you send an application from each school? The answer is yes.
Yes, and that's why we say 1 student per school and not per coordinator. But Page Days is a very important advocacy tool. We have a wonderful relationship with our legislators, but it is not something that we can just rest and say, okay, we've got a good relationship. Everybody else take it from here. We have to stay in the forefront of their minds. If you are not at the table, you're being eaten in Frankfort. Okay. So we want to stay at the table, and Page Days is one of the ways we do that. Because the kids show up and they have the Page Day buttons, and the legislators and their secretaries have arranged it all through the coalition. And it just kind of keeps the Family Resource Youth Service Centers in the forefront of their mind. And that is the reason behind a lot of our advocacy. We can never rest on our laurels. For those who are new and weren't around in the beginning, this has been a hard won fight. And the winning is in the staying relevant. Okay. There were times when I first started and they said, oh yeah, you might want to find a different career. This is not going to last long. And it scared. I was scared every year for like 10 years until I realized, nope, I think we're going to be around for a little while. But those were years we were fighting. It was a grant program. We were fighting to keep our funding and making sure nobody had their little fingers in our pie and all that kind of stuff. And that was all done through the advocacy efforts that we've had in Frankfort. So that's why we continue them, even though we have really lovely relationships and our legislators are so very supportive of what we do. You must stay relevant. So if we can go on to the next slide.
Before we move on, can I chime in there real quick? I'm sorry. Just one other thing that we wanted to touch on that was that once those page applications are turned in, which they were due on December the 1st, it's just important for everybody to understand that we've seen that legislative calendar that Marianne showed earlier. So what has to happen from there is public policy has to take that calendar and coordinate 170 students with each of those legislators. And so the logistics of that gets to be daunting. And so that's why you turn it in December and you don't hear anything until, mid-January, late January or something of that nature. It's because they're still trying to figure out what days that you can send kids. And then you're trying to plot it in regions or localized areas. So that's why it takes a little bit of time. But do know that once that's done, that students will receive a letter telling them what day they've been assigned to. And then also the coordinator will get a communication telling them what day their student has been assigned to.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. It is a long process, and we've got about 3 hands in the pie. Chris is kind of, 4, because we can't do anything without Michael Jones. He is wonderful. But Krista kind of takes the lead. Then Marianne's helping with making sure that page moms and things are notified. And that's the ladies who help with the program at the Capitol. And then I'll be helping to assure that the communication gets out in a timely manner and kind of be there to say hi. That's my job. But we are working diligently to make sure that we can step up our efforts with communication with the families and with the coordinators this year. So Another part of our advocacy efforts is, of course, Frisk Week. This year it will be February 5th through the 9th. And we have sent out a toolkit about that. Now, I want you guys to understand, yes, we send out the toolkit to you guys, but we have also sent it out to superintendents and principals. And so we do expect you to celebrate yourselves because you do such wonderful work. But I know that there are some coordinators that have a problem feeling conceited and asking. I'm not asking you to do that, but you do need, I call it self-promotion. And it's not even self-promotion, it's center promotion. When you write things about Family Resource Youth Service Center, you should never say my center, our center, this, that, and the other. It should be the center. It is about what comes from the center and the programs that are coming out of it. It's not necessarily about the coordinator. So when you're doing that kind of promotion, don't say I did this or we did that, but that the center has provided this program. The center has given out 800 backpacks for the year. That's kind of a way to word it to where you feel a little bit better about not saying I did this and I did that. But if you're doing a good job, I'm telling you, I've been in the newspaper 3 times this week. And it's all because other people gave me stuff, but I put it in the newspaper because I want people to, one, know that those organizations are helping, and two, to always know that there's question, what is a Family Resource Youth Service Center? Do I know what that is? And always staying relevant in their mind as well. But anyway, for Frisk Week, we would love to have you use the hashtag that's in the toolkit and send us some pictures of things that the center has supported and done. And it is a time to celebrate the centers and the programs that are coming out of them that help us ensure that the students are receiving a great education and that we are taking care of the whole child. So please, I ask that you participate in that. We will be sending out the toolkit again to superintendents and principals in January, and then probably again just before February 5th, because we do want them to be the ones to celebrate you as well. They can celebrate you. You can show the world what the center is doing. I think that would be a great way to explain it. We also have the legislative meet and greet in Frankfort this year because that we do the meet and greets on the long session. And so the regional representatives will be in contact with people in their region to set up a table of information for your region in the Capitol. Now, those of you who have been around for a while, you know that we used to do the legislative receptions in the evening. And we have just found through trying it out that we reach more of our legislators when we do the meet and greet just at the Capitol versus having them come have some shrimp puffs with us at night. And it is about reaching our legislators. So we will do the meet and greet during the day this year, and we will be announcing that date soon because I did not write it down, and I think it will be in March.
It's March 13th.
I thought it was, but I didn't want to say it wrong, and I'm not at my desk. It'll be at March 13th this year. So when your regional representatives reach out to you or regional reps be thinking about it, please help them put that information together because it's a great way for our legislators to stop by, show their support of us, and then get some more information on what's happening in their hometown communities. Now, on the short sessions, we do the individual meetings with legislators, or no, we do the hometown receptions. So that was when the regional representatives will be putting something together in their local communities for legislators. And like I said, when we were looking at the calendar, that section in January where we know they're going to be at home, that's usually we usually pick some date or allow you guys to pick some date during that time in order to do the local receptions for legislators. Again, all of this is part of staying relevant. And I know that's just such a simplistic way to put it, but it's very, very important. Like I said, if you're not sitting at the table having dinner, you are dinner in Frankfurt. That's a crass kind of way of putting it, but you have to stay relevant. You have to stay in the forefront, and these are some of the ways that we do that. One of the things that Coalition does as well is we schedule individual meetings with legislators. Like we don't have back in the day when we would have a some type of request, we may have scheduled differently, but right now we are just letting them know that we are thankful for their support. And if something comes up that we need to discuss with them, we'll have those individual meetings with the people who are like over A&R committee or over the education committee, those important targeted legislators. But we will also be asking of our coalition members, are you involved with this legislator? Do you know him? Are you a constituent? Will you come with us? Most legislators will not meet with us unless we have a constituent with us. And some of us years ago found that out the hard way, because you might be asked to leave if you don't bring somebody of importance to the meeting. But that's one of the reasons why we do ask our members that if you have a relationship with your legislator, please let us know, because we may need you. Okay. And of course, the other thing that we do is calls to action. And like Mike Flynn had said, we monitor things, and we don't put out calls to action unless we truly feel like it is needed to be targeted that way. We're not going to waste your time. We're not going to waste our community's time, because most of the time we have a call to action, we're asking you to ask people in the community to do this as well. So please know that when we put those calls to action out, that it has been thoroughly researched, and we really feel like this is the action we need to take. So does anybody have any other questions? I kind of got lost in looking at the chat. So if a legislator approaches you and asks you a question and you don't know the answer, it is perfectly okay to say, you know what, I'm not quite sure about that, but can I get back to you? And then here's the list of the public policy folks that you can ask at any time, any questions you may have. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to jump on here and ask? Did I overrun your thing, Mike? Did I take your slide?
Leslie, you did a wonderful job, and I wasn't stopping you.
I am so sorry.
You're good.
Anything to add, dear?
I think you covered it beautifully.
I was just kind of wondering, and I might have missed it, what are some of the things for the 24 session? Are we just looking more at just the budget? Like what kinds of things in the budget, I guess, are we hoping to increase, or are they?
So every year, do y'all mind if I take it? Every year, the division is asked for some priorities, and this year the priority was to try to move centers that are serving multiple schools, where districts want to, that we could move those to centers serving one school, so that more students can be reached with more coordinators. So that's what we're looking at this year, and that would increase funding, obviously, and so that's why we mentioned the budget bill. That's where that would come into play. So a lot of times we are given money in the budget bill, and it will actually specifically say these funds are being allocated to the Division of Family Resource and Youth Services Centers and it will say to have more single centers serving one school.
And Marianne, in that, are they not, and you may have just said this, but are they not asking to up the minimum so that for some of those schools, it would actually be possible to do? Because a lot of them are combined because they can't meet a coordinator salary. So part of that ask is to increase the minimum. And before you ask, I'm a maximum center. They're not looking at us. I had already asked, I already asked Melissa, does that mean we're kind of all going up? And she said, no. So
Right. And yes, you are correct. We said one center, one school was, you know, something that we put in our request. And as far as applying and all of that, that information would come. That's honestly just a wish, because that's what when you submit those things, it's just a wish. So as far as how to apply and what that application process will look like, we would know more once we would know if that's actually going to happen. So
well, and the neat thing about that wish list is that again, we are proud to have a wonderful relationship with our legislators, and for them to consider something like that, that relationship does come into play. You know, when we have educated them on what we do and the importance of what we do and for how many we do it, that all comes back to mind when they're looking at these things. So that's another reason why we just kind of stay. You know, sometimes I always told people I feel like a clown in the front going, hey, look at me, look at us, this is what we do, keep it focused over here. Uh, but it's important, because when you have shown them the data, which we can show now, and you've been in kind of in their face a little bit, then they remember you when it's time to look at these long budgets.
right.
Mary Ann, just a quick, did we answer Jessica's question in the chat?
How does a district apply for that option?
Yes, you did.
Yeah, because I just said that we wouldn't know that until we know for sure if that request would be granted or if we will have the funds to separate those schools.
Well, and then if it's granted, I'm sure that that will be something that the division would reach out to the schools that would qualify and make sure that it's known that they could do this, right?
That is correct. Yeah. And that's the reason I said if a district would choose to do that, because some districts like the way that they have things configured, and they have shared with us that they would not be interested in splitting their centers for various reasons. So it wouldn't be a mandate for sure. I think we have 1 minute left. Do we have any other questions?
I just wanted to say, Mike, I'm sorry I took over your slides, but I get to talking about what we do for careers and the centers and the coalition, and I get very excited. Yes, this is my last year, but I still have a passion for it, and I will always be a member of the coalition. I will always want to promote what is being done through Frisk and the schools, and you just saw it here today. I get to go on it, and I just want to talk to anybody. That I will even take the slides from one of my greatest friends. But it's a passion, and it will always remain with you. If you've been in this business more than 3 years, it's a part of who you are. It's kind of like, your center. It's like there's pictures of people who start to look like their dogs. Yeah, I've started to look like my center. So I just wanted to say thank you, Mike, for understanding, and just know that it's out of a sense of love and passion that happens.
We have a question from Linda. If the centers don't split, yes, we will not turn that money back. We will, it will still go into centers. So, so I wanted to go ahead and answer that too. I hope I didn't miss any. And then I was going to do a poll to see if y'all learned anything, and we ran out of time. So please fill out your survey to let us know if this was helpful for you, because that is great information to know. And thanks, everybody. You guys are the heart of our public policy, and we couldn't do it without you. So thanks for being with us today.